was there because the Iraqis apparently were using it. It was being used as an anti-corrosive. This is a huge water plant that's used to pump water down into oil wells so the oil keeps coming up. And this is basically was used. It had been banned pretty much everywhere in the world for a number of years, but they were using it to keep the pipes clean. And it contained an extremely high amount, almost pure hexavalent chromium. There's some indications, and it's really just speculation, but there's some indications from the Iraqis that they gave to some of the civilian workers on site that as part of the sabotage by the Ba'athist Party, Saddam Hussein's folks, before the Americans got there, they'd spread it around even more than it had been before. And that's why, as a result, it was all over the place, not just in one limited area, in this very large industrial site where these people were doing all this work, and the Guardsmen were providing security on a daily basis. The reason why we know a lot of this stuff is 10 of the American civilian workers out there filed an arbitration claim, which is one of the things that Halliburton required all their employees, including of these Cayman Island subsidiaries of KBR, to sign an arbitration agreement to go work over there. 10 of these folks, including the medic on site, who is a fellow named Ed Black, who I think you could call him almost a whistleblower here, filed a claim. It's pending an arbitration, and there has been testimony taken and documents produced in that arbitration that have kind of shed a lot of light about what the managers at the KBR level and the safety folks and the other managers involved knew about it. And one of the important issues that came out in that was that as it became more and more clear, in other words, they kept getting reports of sodium dichromate out there, deadly carcinogen. Their plant workers were getting sick. The people out there, the Cayman Island subsidiary folks, were actually experiencing these blood clots, which unfortunately is the most acute sign of poisoning from hexavalent chromium, and that's kind of the characteristic. They actually call it chrome nose. Even as they're getting these reports, they put off doing any testing until after the windy season had ended. The very first, at least what they've owned up to, testing was done not when they were hired to do it, when they were supposed to do it back in April and May, but not until August, after these folks had been out there for 3 to 4 months. And not only was the testing inadequate, they basically were very selective about how they did it, and it didn't line up. The air testing didn't line up with the soil testing. But when they actually did some blood testing on the civilian workers there, and almost all of them had elevated chromium, which just basically measures all the chromium in your blood. But when you got these guys exposed, that's a big red flag. There was actually a meeting here with the medical director of Halliburton KBR and a number of the managers where they discussed the need, or if you're really going to test and see whether or not hexavalent chromium is in these guys, the incredibly dangerous substance, there's a test you're supposed to do, and they decided not to do that test. And unfortunately, not just for the civilians, but also for the National Guardsmen, if that test isn't done fairly shortly after the exposure, and they knew that, there's no real way to document the level of exposure, so tracking these guys health-wise forward is going to be that much more difficult.
Well, Michael Doyle, we asked KBR to join us today, but they declined our request. And we did receive a statement from their Director of Corporate Communications, Heather Brown. She said the company intends to vigorously defend against the suit. And I want to read to you part of the statement. It says, quote, "We deny the assertion that KBR harmed troops and was responsible for an unsafe condition. KBR appropriately notified the Army Corps of Engineers upon discovery of the existence of the substance on the site, and the Corps of Engineers concluded that KBR's efforts to remediate the situation were effective. Further, the company in no way condones any action that would compromise the safety of those who serve or employ." I'd like to ask you to respond to that, and also to what the military did, if they were informed by KBR of the existence of this problem.
Well, thanks, Juan. I think there's really two things in there. One of them is that their indication that they informed the military in a timely manner One of the things that has been provided to these soldiers by the National Guard was a timeline that was actually, we were able to attach to the complaint, that was apparently provided based on information the Army got from KBR. And one of the most glaring kind of issues in there is that when you look at it, it claims KBR didn't know about this sodium dichromate on site until almost the end of July, and then immediately notified the military. We know that's not true. Likewise, the issue about their remediation, they finally admitted that this was a problem. The actual top manager of KBR in Iraq did a site inspection middle of August in full protective gear. It still took them about 3 weeks before they finally said, okay, we've got these blood tests now, let's go ahead and shut down the plant. And they did eventually seal off the entire plant, seal off the sodium dichromate, more or less encase it all, and ensure that folks finally were given protective equipment that they should have had 3 months earlier and told about what was out there. But that's a little bit late for the folks that have been working there for 3 to 4 months.
Jody Astrup, what about the KBR workers inside? You were guarding outside and you got sick. What happened to them?
From the beginning, we were guarding inside. We didn't actually pull outside until they deemed the site unsafe. So from the beginning of going into the plant for KBR to work on it, we were inside right with them. We would follow them around like we were attached to them.
And do you know what happened to any of them suffering like you did, the nosebleed, for example?
The only thing that I know is I did some research on the net, and that's where I found out about the lawsuit from Mr. Ed Black. I actually know Mr. Black. I protected him over there.
The medic?
Yes. Yes. And that's how I know KBR, they were suffering the same symptoms that we were. And then, you know, I received a letter about the town hall meeting, and then the Guard informed us what was going on.
And when you all got these nosebleeds, again, what KBR told you, how they explained those nosebleeds away?
We were basically told that it was due to dry air, the sand blowing. You know, it's not that big a deal.
Michael Doyle, you filed the lawsuit now. In what court will it be heard, and when do you expect to begin having discovery or depositions?
Well, it's filed in federal court in Evansville, Indiana, in the Southern Division or Southern District of Indiana. The hope is as soon as possible. We've been told by the folks we're working with in Indiana that normal timetable is a year and a half for trial. We obviously intend to try and get to the bottom of it as soon as we can, as soon as the court will let us.
And the secret KBR memos that you got a hold of, can you talk about them?
No, I mean, there is some documents. Ed Black was actually able to obtain, when he was there in Iraq and Kuwait, some documents that, when he saw these, that made it real clear who knew and how long they knew it. Those documents aren't protected, but as part of this arbitration deal, at least at this point, KBR has taken the position that every single document related to this is secret and can't be released. So I really can't talk about the documents. I can talk about the testimony, but the documents at this point are subject to a protective order.
The KBR memo from 2003 that shows the KBR managers talking about acknowledging the presence of sodium dichromate?
Well, there is one that Ed Black actually obtained back in 2003 that we were able to file with the papers of the Guardsmen suit. But the great mass of documents, the really documentation, the timeline and all that stuff, I really am not at liberty to talk about, at least at this point.
Well, I want to thank you both very much for being with us. Jody Astrup, former member of the Indiana National Guard. They were based in Tell City, one of 16 soldiers who are suing KBR, which was owned by Halliburton, which was headed by Dick Cheney before he was vice president. And Michael Doyle, lead counsel for the National Guardsmen. He is based in Houston, where KBR is based. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. In our last segment, we're going to go back to the Persian Gulf War as we continue the special on poisons of war. But now we'll go back even further. Juan?
Yes, to another U.S.